Welcome to session number 8, Being a Successful Entrepreneur. Have you ever wondered what makes certain people so successful? If you compare two people of similar intelligence, a similar upbringing, and similar education, well, how can one person be so incredibly successful in life and the other person just be average? Is it luck? Is it skill? Is it work ethic? I remember back when I first started my career, I'd see these successful people and I'd wonder to myself, what exactly are they doing differently than everyone else? And can I do what they're doing? I didn't want to be average. I wanted more. I wanted to achieve greatness. I'd see these people driving luxury cars, living in mansions, and traveling to exotic places around the world. And I'd ask myself, why couldn't that be me one day? It's not that I was materialistic. I just didn't think these people possessed any superhuman powers that I couldn't develop myself. Now, maybe I was naive, or maybe I had an overly inflated opinion of myself, or maybe I just realized something that most people never quite grasp. I realized that success is nothing more than preparing for and creating opportunities, and then being able to capitalize on these opportunities immediately. Now, sure, being lucky can expedite the process of becoming successful, but I've never seemed to be able to create luck in my life, out of thin air. I've read books about success that implied that all you have to do is think positive thoughts and expect positive things to happen, and that this was the so-called secret. Give me a break. I know of too many people that have used positive thinking as a substitute for hard work, which is absolutely ridiculous. The real world doesn't work that way. I've also heard people talk about how they asked the universe to magically make them rich, and that magically they opened their mailbox one day and they found a big check. Now, perhaps this actually happened to a few people, possibly through an inheritance. But, call me crazy, but becoming rich due to the death of a loved one doesn't seem like something to celebrate. In addition, inheriting someone else's fortune doesn't make you successful. Being successful implies that you've accomplished something on your own merit, usually overcoming multiple adversities along the way. You see, a truly successful person is one that has built character through perseverance, dedication, and sacrifice. I know a lot of rich people that I wouldn't categorize as being successful. Sure, they have money, but they didn't accomplish anything on their own merit to get it. There are so many teachings out there that imply that you can achieve financial success by substituting something mystical in the place of hard work. I even know people that say that if you have faith in God, that God will take care of all your needs, almost devaluing the importance of hard work. These same people will quote the Bible when discussing this issue. Matthew 6:26 says, "Look at the birds in the air. They do not sow or reap or store away in their barns, and yet your heavenly Father feeds them. Are you not much more valuable than they?" But let's take this scripture and put it in the proper context. Have you ever seen a bird kicking back in a lounge chair with his beak open, waiting for a worm to crawl in? Of course not. Birds work hard all day long looking for food. One of the fundamental principles of success is that in most cases, you have to create your own opportunities, just like the birds do. Now, perhaps God provides the worms for the bird, but the bird still has to do the work to find them. The bird has to work hard. Now, unless you're a trust fund baby or you marry a wealthy person, you have to do something in order to get something. So-called luck often happens when opportunity and the proper preparation meet. In reality, this is not luck at all. This is planned success. So the question is, if you want to be successful in business, what should you do? Well, most people don't know the answer to this question, and so they look outwardly for answers, which is the beginning of the problem. Being successful in business, and in life for that matter, is about looking internally and reprogramming your thought process. We've all been involuntarily programmed and brainwashed by the media, pop culture, and society at large to think like a pessimist. You need to reprogram your thought process. So let's talk about reprogramming your thought process. The first step of reprogramming the way you think is to see things for what they really are. I'm not an advocate of being unrealistically positive about adverse situations. That's called denial. Denial will not improve your situation. Now, that being said, being unrealistically negative doesn't help things either. Many times we see our current situation as being worse than it actually is, which will lead to a life of failure. I'm not suggesting that you force yourself to see things as being better than they actually are, but I am suggesting that you shouldn't see things as being worse than they actually are. You've got to objectively see things for what they really are. What we're talking about here is having a realistic yet optimistic perspective. Your current situation is what it is, but the game changer is your perspective on your current situation. Your perspective shapes what you're going to do about your current situation to change the circumstances in your favor. That's why I say the first step to being successful is to do some internal work, starting with changing your perspective. Your perspective is based on how you emotionally process an experience, and ultimately, what you do about it. What you do is predominantly shaped by your perspective regarding the level of difficulty of what it is that you're attempting to do. How hard or easy is the task at hand? So let's talk about this concept of hard versus easy. If you view something as being hard to do, you'll most likely procrastinate and possibly never get around to attempting to execute the task. However, if you view something as easy to do, you're more likely to just get it done. In business, we as human beings are very susceptible to our emotions. We abhor the feeling of rejection, which is why most people avoid situations that could potentially lead to feelings of rejection. Now, the obvious problem with rejection avoidance is that if you give into it, you'll never accomplish anything. Right? Usually when people say that their business is hard, they're referring to the emotional component of the task, not the task in and of itself. For example, sales is one of the most looked down upon professions, which I find to be incredibly ironic. Without salespeople, there would be no consumers. And without consumers, there's no revenue. And without revenue, there's no profits. And without profits, companies lay off employees. And without jobs, well, you know what happens next. Salespeople create jobs for people and stimulate the economy. Whether you're a business owner or a corporate executive or a sales executive or a telemarketer, you're in sales, and you should be proud of it. Without you leading the charge, companies go out of business. I've heard people say that being in sales is quote-unquote hard, but think about this for a moment. It's not a physically difficult thing to do. You pick up the phone, you dial it, you talk into it, and that's about it. There really isn't anything else to it. It's not a physically hard thing to do. It doesn't require a superhuman skill. The only skills required would include, one, literacy. You have to have the ability to read and memorize your pitch. Two, you have to have vocal competency, which is the ability to audibly speak out loud. And three, minor dexterity. You have to have the ability to physically dial the phone with your finger. Well, most people have these skills. So by definition, being in sales is not hard. The hard part is experiencing rejection 90% of the time and not allowing the high percentage of rejection to affect your emotions in an adverse way. Let's face it, getting rejected sucks. It doesn't make you feel good about yourself. No matter how much someone tells you it's just a numbers game, it still makes you feel like crap. This is just a function of poor expectation management. So let's talk about managing your expectations. In the world of selling, you're only going to have about a 10% contact rate, which means that you're only going to get 10% of your prospects on the phone with you. 90% of them are going to be unavailable for a variety of reasons, and you'll get their voicemail. Well, of this 10% that you actually talk to on the phone, you're probably only going to book appointments with about 10 to 15% of them. So if you look at your total experience on the phone, over 98% of every call you make results in failure. Right? Now, if you understand that this is the road to success, then you won't sweat it. But if you lose clarity and you get emotional about it, you'll start making a series of bad decisions based on your misinterpretation of your results. Like, for example, in school, if you score 30% on your exam, you fail the exam. But in baseball, if your batting average is 300, which is a 30% success rate, well, you're an all-star. See, it all comes down to understanding what specific results constitute success and setting your expectations accordingly. If your expectations aren't in line with the true definition of success in your specific industry, you could get depressed about your results when in fact you're tracking perfectly according to the proper success expectations. Now, if a baseball player got depressed that he only succeeded 50% of the time, meaning he was batting 500, that would be ridiculous. But it would be understandable if he was comparing it to scoring, say, 50% on a math exam, which would earn him an F grade, right? Thus, truly understanding how to gauge success as it pertains to your results in your specific business is paramount. I've seen people quit careers simply because they misunderstood or they lost sight of what constitutes success in their particular industry. Understanding the numbers, the ramp-up time, pipeline building, and future gains is what separates successful business people from sales rep burnouts. One of the companies I own is a $37 million insurance agency. And this morning I held a meeting with some of my sales producers regarding this debate of whether the insurance business was hard versus easy. So I asked my sales producers if they thought the insurance business was a quote-unquote hard business. And I got a wide variety of responses. My goal of this meeting was to help them clarify the actual tasks required to succeed in our particular industry, in this case the insurance industry. I also mathematically illustrated what the actual payoff was per prospecting phone dial. You should have seen their eyes light up. In my prospecting system, I know the numbers on a very intimate level. I designed my insurance consultant firm to generate sales opportunities exclusively through cold calling, which no one does in my industry. In the initial testing phase of developing my firm, we tracked statistical results using cold calling as our primary form of marketing. And so, let's say one of my sales producers makes 500 phone dials. We have a 6% contact ratio, meaning that 94% of every dial we make results in us not being able to generate a conversation with a decision maker due to the fact that they're not available to talk. This means that 6% of these calls result in conversations with decision makers. And in our case, we define a decision maker as a business owner. So a 6% contact rate on 500 phone dials equals 30 conversations with decision makers. Of these decision makers we talk to, our average appointment booking percentage is 14%. So 14% of 30 decision maker conversations equals 4.2 appointments generated with decision makers. Now of these 4.2 decision makers we generate meetings with, our average closing percentage is 32%. So 32% of the 4.2 decision makers equals 1.3 deals closed per 500 dials. You follow me so far? If we use an average company size of 10 employees, my sales producer's commission is approximately $1,000 per year. So if the client only stays on the books for 5 years, the total commission paid to my sales producers would be $5,000. So this means that for every 500 phone dials my producer makes, at $5,000 in commission per client, each dial would be worth $10, regardless of the outcome of each individual call. So I asked my sales producers, if I change the commission plan here to $10 per dial, would you think this job is, hard or easy? And they all started laughing because they finally realized their misperception of making cold calls. I asked them, hey, if I paid you $10 per dial, how much would you have made last week? Well, the average number of dials was a little over 400 dials per week per producer, which means they would have made over $4,000 last week, which would be the equivalent of $16,000 per month, which would be the equivalent of $192,000 per year. So I asked them if they would prefer this commission plan over the one that currently exists. Now, most of my new producers emphatically jumped at the idea of this proposition. In fact, they said, with this type of compensation plan, this would be the easiest job they ever had. Well, the irony is that George, one of my successful producers that's been with me for almost 7 years now, made over $221,000 in commissions with me last year. Now, do you think he wants to switch out commission plans? No way. You see, once the newer producers compared the two compensation plans, and after discovering what George makes, they all realize that if they work hard for 7 more years, they'll be making more than $10 per dial. You see, so illustrating their actual monetary return on their investment per dial help them understand how easy their job really is. The world of sales and the dating world are both numbers games. In my success training seminars, I often use examples of human interaction in the dating world because the world of dating is so analogous to sales and business. In most cultures, the man is usually the one that typically approaches and pursues the woman. So metaphorically speaking, the man is the quote-unquote sales producer and the woman is the quote-unquote prospect. Okay, so the man is trying to get a date with the woman, and the precursory goal is to get her to willingly give him her phone number, usually. All right? In order for the woman to want to give the man her phone number, the man has to build trust, likability, and feelings of attraction with the woman, and he only has a few short minutes to do it. The initial interaction must make the woman feel comfortable or intrigued, preferably both. And if the interaction doesn't go smoothly, and if it feels forced or awkward, it will probably end poorly. Okay, so the question is, what can a man do or say that will make the woman attracted to him and intrigued by him? Well, most men do not know the answer to this question, which is why most single men experience so much anxiety when it comes to dating. In my previously written book, How I Built a $37 million Insurance Agency in Less Than 7 Years, I actually discuss how to overcome this anxiety in Chapter 9, entitled Managing Expectations. The primary purpose of that chapter was to overcome the fear of prospecting and the fear of rejection. However, ironically, most single guys seem to be more interested in utilizing those techniques to talk to women instead of generating sales. Go figure, right? But in a nutshell, the concept of overcoming the fear of prospecting is that if you understand the numbers game and you map out the mathematics of it all, you'll eventually succeed. So let's use a humorous hypothetical example. Okay, and single ladies, you can participate in this too. Okay, so think about how many people you come within a 100-foot radius to, on a daily basis. I mean, is it realistic to say that within this physical radius, you see at least one person per day that you're physically attracted to? Okay, well, consider this. If you walked up to just one of these people per day and started a conversation with them, and at the end of the conversation, you said, hey, we should hang out sometime. Let me get your number. What's the worst thing that could happen to you? I guess they could say, no, I'm not interested. Now I could sit here and say, so what, right? It's no big deal. But the problem is that it is a big deal, right? At least emotionally. I mean, the feeling of getting rejected sucks, right? So what happens? Okay, you avoid putting yourself in scenarios where you risk the chance of getting rejected. Now, if you're single, and if it's fair to say that you see at least one person per day that you find attractive, what if you forced yourself to talk to that one person each day? I mean, sure, you'd get rejected a lot, but think about this. Okay, you'd have talked to 365 people per year. Now, let's also assume that half of these 365 people that you find attractive are married. Okay, this leaves you with about 182 unmarried people. Okay, let's also assume that of the remaining 182 unmarried people, half of them are already in committed relationships. Okay, this would leave you with a pool of 91 people that are quote-unquote qualified dating prospects for you. Let's say that half of these people don't find you to be physically attractive for whatever reason. I mean, they think you're totally butt ugly. But in all seriousness, of the 91 people, 46% of them, prefer taller or shorter people, or people of a different ethnicity, or people that dress differently, or people that have a different hairstyle or hair color, or whatever. Okay, that means that 46 of the people that you find attractive don't find you attractive. Now, that sounds depressing on the surface, but just look at the real numbers objectively. Okay, it means that 45 people do find you attractive. It may not make you feel better, but 45 attractive people that also find you attractive, I mean, that's a lot of people. So let's say that of this pool of 45 people, you totally screw up the conversation with half of them, and they walk away thinking you're a total dork. Now, I don't think this would happen, but let's just say it does. Okay, that means that you still have 22 people that you find to be physically attractive, that also find you to be attractive, and they also find you interesting and fun to talk to. Okay, so that's a run rate of almost 2 first dates every month. I mean, that's a lot of first dates. Now, sure, only 6% of your efforts ended in success, which means that you had a 94% failure rate, but who cares? Your failure rate is irrelevant as long as your success rate was enough to get you what you ultimately want. In this case, 2 first dates per month. I mean, that's a lot of first dates. Now, think for a moment about a happily married person, okay? Think about this. How many first dates has the average happily married person gone on in their entire adult life? And think about this for a moment. For most people, it's less than 10. So under these numbers, in this crazy example, you would have gone on more than double the amount of first dates that the average happily married person has gone on in their entire lifetime. And you did it inside of just 12 months. I mean, statistically, you would have met at least 2 people that you would actually consider marriage material. And again, you did it in just 1 year. I mean, that's not bad. So you see, success is not about percentages. Success is about aggregates. Okay, it's about what you ultimately end up with and how you perceive the experience along the way, relative to your outcome. So you may be asking yourself, why is Darren talking about dating and cold calling? I mean, what does this have to do with being successful and living outside the cubicle? Well, both the dating world and the cold calling / prospecting world are analogous to being successful in business because they both deal with your expectations and managing your emotions. They both deal with a significant amount of rejection. When it comes to finance and success in business, the amount of rejection you experience is only relevant based on the size and frequency of the ultimate reward. Okay, so in monetary terms, who cares if you got rejected 99 times out of 100 if it meant you made over $1 million? I mean, because the end result was worth the emotional feeling of rejection along the way. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about regarding truly understanding the outcome of your actions. Okay, the physical act of prospecting may not be as fun as watching TV, but it certainly pays off financially over time. Okay, you need to understand what the real reward is, and then reverse engineer the mathematical formula to come to a dollar figure that each individual action is actually worth. Okay, once you do this, your perspective, in this case regarding making cold calls, your perspective will change and you'll see what your actual reward is. Not your immediate emotional reward, but rather your bigger picture monetary reward. Okay, I've seen so many people lose sight of their bigger picture because they get caught up in their day-to-day emotions based on their day-to-day results and day-to-day experiences, especially early on in the game. Okay, well, this is about as illogical as going to the gym and complaining that you haven't lost 20 pounds and 4 inches off your waist within the first week. Or deciding to build a house and complaining a week later that you don't have a mansion yet. Building a successful career or a successful business, generally speaking, takes time. You've got to map out your game plan and create a timeline. And your timeline must be based off a proven model in order to set, achievable expectations. If you're venturing off into uncharted waters and being a true pioneer, I think that's great. But just remember that although your success could manifest overnight, it'll most likely take longer than you emotionally want it to. That's where discipline and clarity come in. Discipline is obviously important when it comes to being successful, but an equally important component to the success formula is clarity. So think of it like this. Discipline is the muscle behind your operation, whereas clarity is the brains behind your operation. You need both in order to be successful. You can have more discipline than your competition, but if you're doing the wrong things or not enough of the right things, you'll fail. You've got to do enough of the right things repetitively over time. This leads us back to the $1 million question: what are the right things you should be doing to become successful? Well, as we uncovered in this program, the answer is not a secret, nor is it mystical. Okay, it's based on a formula of simple, logical principles that I have used in my own life. And my wish for you is that you apply these principles to live a happier, more successful life. Okay, always remember this. Never despise the days of small beginnings. Okay, I'm going to say that again. Never despise the days of small beginnings. I mean, you've got to start somewhere, and usually the beginning stages are not very glamorous, okay, but they are necessary. Okay, so let's talk about step one of the empire building process, okay, the part that few people know how to do properly, and that is the area of prospecting. Coming up next, session number 9, entitled The Fine Art of Prospecting.